Hello, I'm Aurora, and I want to share a story from 2 years ago, a story filled with profound regret. It's about the time when I started lying to my dad, a decision I deeply lament. To make matters worse, these lies were meant to conceal the painful truth that my mom was cheating on him. Let me recount what transpired. Our family consisted of just my parents and me. Being an only child was never an issue for me because I had a close circle of friends. My dad worked as a waiter, and my mom was a secretary. We didn't possess great wealth, but we led contented lives. However, everything took a turn for the worse a few years ago when my parents' relationship started to deteriorate. Their arguments became increasingly frequent. They tried to shield me from their disputes, arguing in separate rooms or when they believed I wasn't around. Yet, I wasn't oblivious. I could sense the tension, and I despised it. To divert their anger away from each other, I would blast loud music or slam doors so they'd reprimand me instead. My dad, in particular, was terribly harsh on my mom, who seemed perpetually on the verge of tears while he appeared indifferent. The situation grew so unbearable that I came to dread being at home. I sought refuge at my friends' houses as often as possible, but my dad persisted in calling, inquiring when I'd return and who I was with. I yearned for him to just leave me be. One night, I stayed over at my friend Leah's house in the neighboring town, a place I enjoyed because her parents had an atmosphere free of strife, in stark contrast to my own home. That evening, they took us out to a nice restaurant for dinner. When we arrived, a woman at the bar caught my eye. Her back turned to me, but somehow familiar. She was whispering intimately in a man's ear, their hands entwined. When she leaned back, her face came into view, and I was struck by disbelief. The woman was my mother, and the man with whom she shared this tender moment was not my father. She was laughing, appearing happier than she'd been in a long while. Then the man touched her hand and they shared a kiss. A surge of sickness washed over me as the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. My mother was cheating on my father. I couldn't stomach another bite of my meal, and Leah's parents sensed that something was amiss. In an attempt to conceal my distress, I fibbed, claiming that I wasn't feeling well. They swiftly wrapped up our dinner and brought me back to their home. The following day, I remained unusually quiet at home, and my mother could sense that something was awry. She persistently inquired about my well-being until, unable to contain it any longer, I blurted out that I had seen her with another man. In response, she laughed it off, dismissing my claims as fabrications, but I knew she was lying. The subsequent night, she announced her intention to visit a friend. I waited for her car to depart from the driveway, then hopped on my bike and trailed her. I pedaled with all my might until her car disappeared into the distance, leaving me in uncertainty. I circled the area for an hour, navigating the streets, until I finally spotted her car parked in a driveway. I halted outside, walked up to the doorstep, and rang the doorbell, all the while feeling a nagging doubt. What if it truly was just a friend's house, as she had asserted? The door swung open, and the man I had seen with her at the bar stood before me. I had been right all along. My mom was indeed involved in an affair. I shouted loudly for my mom to come outside, heedless of the neighbors who had turned on their lights and peered out their windows. Mom rushed to the door, ushered me inside, and swiftly closed it behind her. My anger and frustration boiled over, and I unleashed a torrent of accusations, labeling her as a deceiver and a cheat. Eventually, she managed to calm me down and explain that the man, Isaac, was merely a friend who was assisting her with bills. She emphasized how hard she worked and the financial struggles she, much like Dad, endured. Isaac even offered me a glass of water and inquired about my well-being, trying to reassure me that his involvement was purely platonic, aimed at helping my mom during challenging times. It was shocking to learn that my mom had fallen into debt, and the kind-hearted Isaac appeared to genuinely care for her. While I sat in Isaac's living room, my phone rang, and it was my dad on the line. He began yelling, demanding to know my mom's whereabouts and expressing his anger that she wasn't at work. His frustration was vented upon me. I glanced at Mom, seated on the couch, holding Isaac's hand. I found myself torn between my love for my dad and my desire to see my mom happy. In a moment of difficult decision-making, I chose to protect my mother by lying to my own father. I fabricated a story, claiming that I was at school and that Mom was with me. I spun a tale about being in the nurse's room due to a head injury, which had prompted them to call Mom for pickup. Dad accepted my story and ended the call. Self-disgust washed over me. I had deceived my own father to shield my mother. Isaac and Mom commended my choice, but I harbored doubts about whether it was indeed the right decision. The following day, it was as if nothing had transpired, and I had effectively gotten away with my reprehensible lie. Then that evening, Mom approached me with a request. She wanted to visit Isaac. Dad was slated to work a late shift and wouldn't be home. She implored me to cover for her. I retreated to my room, overwhelmed with a sense of sickness. I couldn't believe what she was asking me to do. When Dad returned home and inquired about Mom's whereabouts, I lied again, informing him that she had gone to a friend's house. He believed me, but I couldn't come to terms with lying to my own father once more. The next day, I confided in Mom, expressing my inability to continue lying on her behalf. I didn't believe it was right for her to maintain a friendship with another man in secret. To my surprise, Mom revealed that she had no intention of seeing Isaac anymore. She emphasized that our family was her top priority, and she was willing to do whatever it took to keep us together. However, she disclosed that she needed my assistance with another matter. She had taken on a second job but didn't want to inform Dad. This way, she could allocate all the money she earned towards resolving our debt. She implored me to keep this secret so she could help our family, a request that weighed heavily on my conscience. I assisted Mom in her deception over the next few weeks. She frequently went out to her second job at night, and I played my part in misleading Dad about her whereabouts. She became so accustomed to my help that she hardly bothered to communicate with Dad anymore. Instead, she would simply head out, leaving me to concoct the necessary lies. Nevertheless, Dad eventually grew skeptical of my explanations. He would call Mom, leaving voicemails filled with anger, demanding her return home. I found it hard to comprehend that while Mom was working diligently to contribute to our family's financial well-being, Dad was attempting to thwart her efforts. Then, one fateful night, Dad sat me down and delivered some startling news. He was moving out. I erupted in fury, grabbing a vase and hurling it against the wall. It shattered, leaving shards of glass and water strewn across the carpet. The idea that Dad was leaving Mom without a fight was incomprehensible to me. I stormed out of the house, refusing to speak to him. When I returned late that night, Dad had vanished. When Mom arrived home, I implored her to call Dad and beseech him to return. However, Mom displayed an unexpected lack of distress. She spoke of how much easier things would be now that he was gone, a sentiment that utterly bewildered me. I had believed that Mom desired our family's cohesion. In my frustration, I fled the house and spent the night at a friend's place. Early the following morning, I returned home before school, intending to apologize to Mom for my outburst. Upon arriving, I noticed someone in the backyard, leaving the house. It was a man who seemed to be sneaking away through the back gate. I maneuvered around the side of the house to observe him further, pondering whether he was a trespasser who had broken in. However, as I examined him more closely, I recognized him. It was Isaac, the man Mom had claimed she was no longer seeing. He climbed into his car and drove off, leaving me with a stark realization. Mom was still involved with Isaac. I was hit with the stark realization that Mom had been unfaithful to my dad all along, and what was even worse, she had manipulated me into lying to cover for her. Fuming with anger, I stormed back into the house and confronted Mom. She confessed that she had never taken a second job and had been involved with Isaac all along. She tried to justify her actions by placing blame on my father, insisting that if he hadn't squandered their money, she wouldn't have needed another man to provide for her. The ensuing days at home took on a surreal quality. Isaac's presence grew more prominent while I saw less and less of Dad. He didn't even call to check on me. Isaac gifted me a new phone and handed me money to spend with my friends. We dined at restaurants, and Mom indulged in a shopping spree for new clothes. The relief of not having to worry about money was undeniable, but I still missed Dad terribly. Then, Mom dropped the bombshell that she and Dad were getting divorced, and she would have full custody of me, which meant I would never have to see him again. In her vision, she could openly be with Isaac, and the three of us would live happily together. That morning, Mom went to consult with lawyers, leaving me to attend school. But when I arrived at school, I couldn't shake the feeling that something profoundly important was transpiring, and I wasn't a part of it. So I decided to sneak out of class and pedal into town. I managed to locate the lawyer's office and insisted on seeing my parents, ignoring the receptionist's surprise protests as she urged me to return to school. Finally, the receptionist led me to see them. They were in a room, seated at opposite ends of the table, their eyes locked in an uncomfortable standoff, until I entered the room. Dad sprang up and rushed over to me, enveloping me in a warm hug. He questioned why I hadn't responded to any of his letters and why my cell phone had him blocked. I was bewildered. I hadn't intentionally blocked him. It suddenly struck me that the new phone Isaac had given me might have had Dad's number blocked, and I realized that they wanted me to believe that Dad hadn't made any attempts to contact me. My gaze shifted to Mom, who remained fixated on the floor. It dawned on me that she hadn't just lied to Dad, she had also deceived me. What kind of mother would keep her daughter from her father? I recognized that I had to make one of the most significant decisions of my life. I turned to the men in suits and made it clear that I no longer wanted to live with my mother. I wanted to live with my father. They all stared at me in astonishment. That was a few years ago, and my life has changed significantly since then. I'm finally beginning to experience happiness again. Following the divorce, my dad and I moved into a small apartment, and our old family home was sold. Despite its size, I find contentment here. Dad explained that the reason we had been struggling financially was because Mom had been spending a great deal of money on herself. He had tried to shield me from this financial strain to spare me from worry, while Mom had painted a picture of it being solely Dad's fault. I don't see much of Mom anymore. She moved in with Isaac after the divorce and initially refused to communicate with me because I had chosen to be with Dad. At times, she would send extravagant gifts in an attempt to win me back, but life isn't defined by material possessions. All I ever truly wanted was a family that loved each other, and now I have that with my dad. I know, without a doubt, that my dad would never compel me to lie for him.